So, for once more, I have to repeat that Twilight Struggle is a card-driven game, and so far you have not really learned Twilight Struggle. In order to actually learn the game, we have to take a look at the cards so that you are prepared of what you are going to face during the game. Because this game is all about experience, you have to know pretty much all the cards that there are inside the deck so that you know how to manage them when they come into your hand. Sometimes the hand that we have drawn might be trash, but this could mean that our opponent has got a similarly trash or even trashier and hard to manage hand, so you have to capitalize on that by knowing what cards your opponent is possibly carrying. So, this is the setup, and it's time to talk a bit about the setup. We will focus on the region of Europe this time. At the start of the game, the Soviet player controls East Germany, the US player controls UK, there is also one influence in Finland and 2 US influence in Canada, which you don't need to see right now. Anyways, at the start of the game, the players, after having seen their hands, and thus after they know what events they drew, they place some influence in Europe. The Soviet player plays 6 influence in Eastern Europe only. He can distribute the influence wherever he likes. He can even place more influence in East Germany if he wants. But now let's do some geography lessons. What is Europe all about, at least during the Cold War era? There are 5 battleground countries. It is Poland and East Germany, which belong to Eastern Europe. And then there is West Germany, which of course, because of the division, belongs to the Western Europe. And also there is France and Italy. These are the 5 battleground countries. So typically, the Soviet player will control these 2 countries, because you start with 3 in East Germany and you are the first player to place influence. So the most usual thing is to place 3 influence in Poland, and you also have 3 remaining influence points to spend. You can also boost Finland or overprotect these countries in case the US player wants to also add influence and flip their control. Also, a usual way to play is to place one Soviet influence in Austria, because as we have noted previously, it belongs to both Eastern and Western Europe. So if the Soviet player plays one influence here, they may access Italy later on to claim this really important Western Europe's battleground. Then the US player places 7 influence in Europe, in Western Europe in particular, wherever he wants. Again, the choices are, usually they will place 4 influence in West Germany because they want to be in control of this battleground, West Germany. So with these 2 countries locked, it's a bit hard for each other to place influence into the other player's country, because as we have mentioned earlier, if the other player is in control, we have to spend 2 operations to place the first influence, and it becomes hard enough. Now, the US player typically will spend 4 operations for influence here in West Germany, and he has 3 remaining, so possibly he wants to take control over Italy. And they also have 1 influence remaining. Probably this will be a 3rd one in Italy, because there is one thing to note. The DEFCON status starts at 5, which means coups are not yet prohibited in Europe. You can coup Europe at DEFCON 5. So if the Soviet player is the first to play, which is of course the case in turn 1, they may coup a weak country, which for example is Italy. With a stability number of 2, its defense is just 4, which means again, if they play a 4 operations card and conduct a coup, it depends on their die roll, but it is pretty likely that they may flip Italy to Soviet control. So usually the US player will be spending a lot of influence to protect Italy. France is safer and you can access France later after the Soviet player has conducted their possibly one-off attempt to coup Italy, because upon their coup the DEFCON status will drop to 4 and then coups will no longer be possible in Europe. If the US player survives this step with at least one influence, then they can place more influence and possibly lock Italy, and then they are free to proceed into France, and this leads to possible domination over Europe for the US player, because they will be controlling these 3 battlegrounds against the 2 Soviet ones. So Europe is very important for the start of the game, because the longer the game goes, the longer the DEFCON status will be left down to 3 or 2, and it will be next to impossible to change the situation in Europe. Coups and realignments will both be prohibited. Now, a new player might ask why not spending many influence points in France from the get-go. Well, the answer is there are many cards in the deck that might throw you off in this occasion. For example, let's have a look at a few cards that are inside the early war deck. So let's have a look at the following cards. De Gaulle leads France, and Suez Crisis, and socialist governments. I would like you to focus on the last one, which is socialist government, which belongs to the early war deck. So that means for the US player that its effect might come out right in turn 1, action round 1, or even during the headline phase. And I have to warn you, for you willing to playing the US, that it is really hard during the early war. For the US side, the Soviet player are in somewhat of an advantage. But this, of course, will change later in the game by the mid and late war. So, socialist governments allows the Soviet player to remove US influence in Western Europe by a total of 3, removing no more than 2 influence per country. What does this mean? It means that in the first headline of the first turn, the Soviet player plays socialist governments and they remove 3 influence. This might be, for example, removing 2 from Italy and 1 for France, and then they are free to place their own influence in Italy, which is really painful for the US player to deal with. So I would like to note that in most cases the most usual variant for playing this game in tournaments is the US +2 variant, which means beside the usual 7 influence that the US player gets to place, they place +2, which could be anywhere in Europe or other countries where they already have influence. So, for example, it could be in Iran to place a second influence point to control Iran, and one more in Italy, for example. After this brief pause, let's go back to the events. There are a lot of painful events for the US player to deal with. There is socialist governments, which removes 3 US influence in Western Europe countries. Also, there is de Gaulle, Charles de Gaulle, which removes 2 US influence, if there is any, in France, and then places a Soviet influence in France. And also there is Suez Crisis, which may remove influence from Israel, France, and UK. A total of 4, no more than 2 influence per country. So there's a lot of pain to come for France. So as a US player, most likely I would not place influence in France, for example, during the setup, because it will possibly be removed and it will be a lost influence point. So now we are coming into the core of the strategy of this game, which is to playing cards, even opponents' cards, while mitigating their effects. You can, of course, try to throw de Gaulle and Suez Crisis into space, but this doesn't change a whole lot, because at some point these cards will be reshuffled into the deck and you will have to face these events again. The most efficient way with dealing with these painful events is to play them like this. I am a US player, I have got the goal in my hand, and there is no influence in France by either side. So when playing a card, it is your choice to choose whether you apply the event first and then perform the operations, or you perform the operations first and then apply the event's text. So in this case, I'm the US player and I will apply the event text first. I will remove the US influence in France, which, as you may see, there is none, and then I will add one Soviet influence. Now I'm playing my operations. After the event has been resolved, I am playing the operations and I am placing 3, because this is a ops value of 3, I'm placing 3 US influence in France. Of course, it would be next to stupid to do the opposite, like place 3 influence and then resolve the effect, which would mean 2 influence would be subtracted and 1 Soviet would be added. I do it in the reverse order because it suits me. I place 1 influence in France, no influence of US is there to be removed, so the card goes away and I use its ops value to place 3 influence. Now you will notice that the goal is a one-off event, so it will be totally removed from the game. It will not come back again. And one thing to note as well is that the early war deck is only enough for the turns 1 and 2, and then in turn 3 it will deal some remaining cards, around 8 cards, and then it will be reshuffled and you will start drawing cards again in turn 3 from this early war deck. So for example, if you have thrown the goal out of the deck, or you have played Suez Crisis as well, let's say for example you have played Suez Crisis when no influence in France is present, the Soviet player has no influence to remove from here, and then you play the goal as well and place your own influence, so both these cards are out of the deck, which means the deck in turn 3 will be pretty lighter for the US player. Now it will be a bit emptied out of Soviet cards and it will be more full of US cards, I would say. Of course, there are some cards that cannot be removed from the deck. Socialist governments will be there. So one tactic would be to space race this card to avoid its effect. But there is also one even smarter tactic, if you ask me, which is I keep this card in my hand because typically, as we have said, we have 8 cards, we headline 1, we play 6 action rounds, and we finish the round with 1 card remaining in our hand. I hold socialist governments in hand, and in turn 3 the deck is reshuffled, but socialist government is still in my hand, so the Soviet player does not get to draw this card by any means. So in this case I'm saying this card will not see the light of day, it will not be played, and after turn 3 I can space race it, and the next reshuffle will be around turn 7, close to the late war. So the smartest tactics in this game, according to me, is playing the opponent's cards while mitigating their effects, and especially the ones that can be taken out of the deck, and at some point holding cards in your hand so that they don't reappear after the reshuffle. You have to be very mindful of the reshuffles. So as I have mentioned, you can apply the opponent's event when you are playing an opponent's card either after or before your operations. In our case, we applied the event first and then we placed influence. But in some other cases, you might have to do the opposite. Let's consider another example. This is Truman Doctrine, a very important event for the US player. Now, the Soviet player, for example, has got 3 influence in Austria, but Austria requires a 4 in order to be fully controlled by a player. So the Soviet player has got Truman in his hand, and it's a one-off card, so the Soviet player wants to get rid of this card, because when the event is played, you remove all USSR influence in one country that is uncontrolled, which means not controlled by either power. So we've got 3 influence, and if we play the event right now, all these 3 influence will be gone. So what we do as Soviet player is we play the operations first. It has an operations value of 1, so we place 1 influence in Austria, which means this one turns into 2, and then this is a total of 4 influence, so we control Austria. In this case, Truman Doctrine has no country to remove Soviet influence from, and it lives without effect, and it is removed from the game. Now, notice that in some cases, as we have said about NATO, for example, the card will not be removed from the game, although it is a one-off card, because the prerequisites have not been met. So, NATO has to be played after Marshall Plan or Warsaw Pact for its event to take place. If none of these cards have already been played, then this event is unplayable. So if the Soviet player plays this card for operations, the event will not take place, but it will not be removed from the game. It will just go to the discard pile to be shoved in later. But Truman Doctrine is fully playable in our case. However, it results in no effect. There is no country to remove influence from. So, since it has no effect, it will be normally played without effect and removed from the game. That's an important difference, so to speak. Again, to conclude our European example, there is a lot of pain to deal with, but if you manage your hands right, you might be able to achieve some domination in Europe, which will earn you many victory points. Later in the game, in mid-war and late war, there are of course countries to shift the Soviet influence as well and possibly go into Eastern Europe. Now, before concluding with the strategy tips, let's look at some more cards which regard the early war. Of course, I have to remind you that there are these three scoring rings in early war: Europe, Middle East, and Asia. Now, a small luck factor is that their importance might vary depending on the following. Early war is from turns 1 to 3, and in turn 3 the cards are not enough, so the deck is reshuffled, and you have to again draw cards from among the discarded early war ones. So maybe you are lucky enough that the Middle East scoring comes out on turn 3 and not on turn 1 or 2, which means it comes once and for all in turn 3. You don't have to play it in turn 1 or turn 2 and then again in turn 3 after the reshuffle. So if you are not willing or have not managed to invest a lot into Middle East, you are lucky because it will only be scored once, which result in less VPs lost for you. In any case, you have to be prepared for it, but you can check if this is the case. So, for example, if you have not drawn it by turn 2, it might possibly mean that it comes into turn 3. So you have to invest less here and possibly invest more in the more profitable regions, which would be Europe and Asia in our case. Now, as a US player, I tend to not really invest much into Middle East because of some cards like this one, Nasser, which practically gives the Soviets control of Egypt, and Egypt is one of the battlegrounds. Again, Egypt, Libya, Israel, Iraq, Iran, and Saudi Arabia are the 6 battlegrounds. Now, the Soviet player has got more chances to control them, especially during mid-war and possibly late war. It is hard to shift this region to US, so I tend to not overly invest here. For example, if I place influence in Egypt, maybe it is flipped over to the opponent by Nasser, so I tend to avoid it. Another thing to note is that there are no real good coup options for the US player at the start of the game. So, for example, we can coup Iraq, but the stability number is 3, so it's highly unlikely that we succeed our coup, because it means we have to get a total of operations value plus the die we roll, a number that supersedes 3, so 7, which is a bit unlikely. So we tend to avoid trying to coup such countries. We usually try to coup countries with a stability number of 2 or 1. So the Soviet player has got a real good coup target in Iran with a stability number of 2, which possibly might shift the control here to the Soviets, which makes them highly likely candidates for Middle East domination. But maybe at some point again we can use the opponent's card for our advantage. For example, we can play Nasser, We have no US influence in Egypt to remove. We placed USSR influence. And then these countries of low stability, so we may even coup Egypt directly using the Nasser card or maybe some other card in the future if we are allowed to do so. And now we have got an attractive target for our coup attempts and gain control over Egypt once and for all. And we will almost conclude our example by focusing a bit into Asia. In Asia, things are slightly different. The US player has got 4 influence, which is enough to control Australia from the beginning of the game, and also one influence in Philippines. Now, it always depends on the DEFCON status and how this goes during the first stages of the game. But when you see DEFCON dropping from 5 to 4 and then to 3, for example, it means that this marker is placed in Asia. So coups are no longer possible and realignments as well in Asia. So when the US player sees this thing, the DEFCON dropping to 3, it means it's time to get on the move. We are in Australia and we can secure all these highly important Southeast Asian countries. It's time to place one influence in Malaysia, and the next step would be to place 2 influence in Thailand to secure it, because now the Soviet player cannot coup any of these countries. Normally this would give you some influence, presence, or even possibly domination in the future. So in short, when you see DEFCON dropping from 5 to 4, maybe it's time to place influence in France, because Europe is now invulnerable. And if you see the DEFCON status dropping to 3, it's time to move from Australia to Malaysia and secure Thailand, which is a battleground for the Asia scoring, and also gives access to all these easy to capture countries. And is also important for the Southeast Asia scoring, of course. And when the DEFCON status drops to 2, it's time to go from here, from Israel, and secure Lebanon, because now Lebanon can be controlled by placing only one influence, and the Middle East will also be invulnerable to coups and realignments when the DEFCON status is at 2. However, there are some cards that might affect our Southeast Asian adventures. We've got Vietnam revolts, which means the Soviet player instantly places 2 USSR influence in Vietnam, and now he's got access to Thailand and Laos, Cambodia, and all of the Southeast Asia, and also they've got 1 bonus operation points for any card that they play for wholly Southeast Asia from now on. Also, there is decolonization, because as we have mentioned, the early war is painful for the US player, which means we add 1 USSR influence in Southeast Asian countries or South African countries. And there's also de-Stalinization, which means the Soviet players stop worshipping the Stalin as they used to do, so they are shifting their focus into other countries, and they can relocate some useless influence that they have in some countries and place it in distant countries that they would otherwise be unable to reach. For example, Thailand or maybe South America or Central America, which they would normally be unable to reach. So this card is a #1 candidate to be held in hand for the Soviet player until turn 3, and then it is a high candidate to be thrown into space. Okay, back into Europe for a little bit. As we have mentioned, France, Italy, and West Germany are the Western Europe battlegrounds that the US players normally want to control. But there is also another card to be mindful of, and this is blockade, if you are the US player. If the Soviet player plays this card, the US player has to discard a card of 3 value or more, or all of his influence in West Germany will be lost. And this is the most likely way to lose West Germany and then the rest of Western Europe and possibly control of Europe, and the Soviet player instantly wins if he controls these 5 countries. So this is by no means acceptable. So, because as US players we know blockade is in the early war deck, we try to always be prepared for these cards to be played against us. So we have to be always holding a card of 3 operations value or higher. Highly probable candidate for this is de-Stalinization. So we will be holding de-Stalinization so that it doesn't see the light of day, and the only way of using it is discarding it for blockade. If the Soviet player plays blockade, we discard de-Stalinization, we save West Germany, and also we get rid of de-Stalinization. However, things get a bit even trickier or even more difficult if the Soviet player plays this card, the red scare. It is a card playable by both players, and of course it is very good to play it if you are the US player as well, because it hinders your opponent's operations. All operations cards will be reduced by a value of 1, the cards of the opponent player. I mean, so it will greatly slow down your opponent, the Soviet player, early on. But if the Soviet player plays this card, it means that our operations are lowered by 1 as well, which means if he plays blockade, we have to discard the 4 operations value card. A 3 operation value 1 will not do. So we will have to be holding possibly a 4 operations value card. Another effect that the red scare or red pairs has got is that it also disallows us from kicking some cards into space. For example, we cannot now space raise decolonization, which we would very much would like to, because now the operations value is dropped to 1, so you can't space race an operations value of 1. And we will close out our strategic tips section by mentioning a very important US card, which is CIA. So, what does this card mean? When CIA is played, either as an event by us, or when the USSR player plays it for operations, the USSR player reveals their hand, and the US may conduct an operations value of 1. They may conduct operations as if they played the 1 operations value card. So, if the DEFCON is at 2, which means 1 more level would instantly provoke the nuclear war. In this case, if the Soviet player plays this card from their hand, we've got an operation value of 1 to use, and we can coup a battleground in their turn, and you know very well what this would mean. It would lose them the game. So the Soviet player plays CIA for some operation, and then the US player gets to use an operation value of 1, and they coup Angola, and because it is a battleground, the DEFCON drops, and we have nuclear war. The US player would win because it would be the Soviets' turn. So this is one of the most painful cards the Soviet player has to deal with early on. And the way to play around this is that, again, in DEFCON 2, there are certain regions protected by coups, which is Europe, Middle East, and Asia. So if the Soviet player has no influence in battleground countries of Africa or America, for example, if their only influence point is here, they are protected. The US player have no place to conduct coups and thus drop the DEFCON. And this will take us into more advanced stuff, like, for example, the US player would play Fidel for operations, so that USSR influence would be placed in Cuba, which is a battleground country, which is not protected by DEFCON 2. So if the Soviet player now plays CIA, we have secured for them a battleground country with USSR influence, where we can coup and lose them the game, as crazy as it may sound. Okay, there are a few more cards, while I'm not going to go into many details. There is defectors, which we can play in our headlines phase. And both players should know about the existence of this card. If the US player plays it, they cancel the headline event of the Soviets, so it is a very good way to cancel some painful card like red scare parts or destabilization, for example. And an important card for the US player is the independent reds, which means add sufficient US influence to equal the USSR influence in some certain countries of Eastern Europe. This one, Yugoslavia, Bulgaria, Romania, Hungary, Czechoslovakia. So early on, the Soviets will not be placing influence typically in these countries because of the existence of this event. And the American players, strangely enough, will want to play this event as early as possible in order to make the Soviets place their influence in Romania. So again, if independent Reds is played, they have a country to equal influence from, in this case Romania. Otherwise, the card would be played and removed from the deck without effect. And that's it. Now you're pretty much ready to play the early war as both sides. I'm not going to go into more details about the mid-war and late war. Next step would be for all of you to watch our playthrough, which will be a lot more fun, and we will talk extensively about our strategic choices so that you understand the game more in detail. And the next and last step would be to practice more and play a lot of games, because only experience will get you through the cards and their implications and consequences. Thank you all. See you in the playthrough.